feel comfortable with me?" Something slightly higher than the bandana said. "Of course, and I want the same of you," I said in Scott's direction. "Please, tell me your story."
"Shouldn't the child leave?"
Scott said.
"I'm afraid my story will frighten her."
"I've seen A Nightmare on Elm Street," Melissa said. "I didn't get scared at all." "No, but you did have to sleep in my bed for a week after you saw Pinocchio," I reminded her. "You kept having whale nightmares." "I was 3, and I'm not leaving." "Go ahead, Scott," I said. "Don't worry about Melissa."
"All right, then. But don't say I didn't warn you," Scott said. "I've been staying in a house a few towns over in Avon. The place was abandoned 10 years ago, and they were supposed to tear it down and put up a hotel, I think. But then the money went away, so I do what I do there. I don't need much, being dead and all."
"So I take it that you're an experienced, spirit?" I asked. Maxie and Paul were still adjusting to their existence after their murders. "May I ask how and when you passed away?"
"It was entirely of natural causes, I can assure you," Scott told me. "Cirrhosis, I think they called it. I drank a bit when I was alive, and that was just about 80 years ago."
"So you said you want us to verify that something happened. What is that?" It was time to get to business, whatever business this was. The scarf untied itself and was rearranged more like headwear. I assumed Scott had taken it from around his neck and retied it into a do-rag.
"About 2 months ago, I was contacted by someone who wanted me to help them with something. They said it was harmless, just a prank, but that they would pay handsomely for my services."
That raised about 75 questions in my head. "How could someone pay you handsomely?" I asked Scott. "No offense, but what does a ghost need with money?"
"Not money," Scott replied. "The reward was that I would be able to leave this form of existence and move on to the next level."
No one in the room spoke for quite some time. Finally, I managed to squeak out, "How were they going to achieve that?"
"They didn't say."
This guy, however dead he might be, was starting to sound like an idiot. "So you were going to perform whatever service was requested, and you had no guarantee at all that the person who contacted you could deliver on what they promised. How did this person get in touch with you? How did they know you were there?" The answer was a long time in coming. Finally, Scott said,
"I can't say how they knew I was living in the old house, but they contacted me through an old child's toy that had been left there. A set of alphabet letters, magnetized, I think, that they used to spell words out on the floor. I kicked the first one and couldn't put the message back together, but it was back the next day when I looked for it. I would find them there at odd times and answer the same way. I never heard the person's voice." I didn't like the way this story was going, but there was an unmistakable sadness that pervaded Scott's voice. Even the red napkin seemed to be bowed, as if Scott was staring at the floor. I looked at Mom. I wasn't actually appealing for help, but that must have been the way she interpreted my expression. "Mr. McFarlane," Mom asked, "who did you think this person was? No one can grant you the kind of thing you were promised. How could you agree to this prank on such thin evidence?" There was silence for quite some time. Then Paul said, "Scott, are you all right?" And I confess my first thought was, of course he's not all right, he's dead. "I'm embarrassed,"
Scott's voice said, finally.
"I don't want to say what I thought."
"If it can help the investigation, Scott, I think you pretty much have to say who you thought was sending you the messages," I said in his general direction. Who do you think was sending you these messages on a preschool alphabet set?
God, he said. I thought it was a sign from God.
Ah, I said. The rest of Scott MacFarlane's story was less bizarre, but not much. For weeks, he had been finding messages spelled out on the floor in what he called his main room. It started with simple messages: hello, how are you, and I see you. Then, Scott found more letters and longer messages, which became more elaborate. An easel showed up one day that the magnetized letters would stick to, and he could read them without bending down or occasionally kicking the words apart accidentally, as had happened a few more times. And Scott began to ask questions, most of which, he said, were never answered.
They wouldn't say how they knew I was there or why they wanted to talk to me, he said. They never explained why we couldn't just talk in person. And pretty soon, the messages were all about how they thought they could help me if I would just do them this one favor.
The favor, apparently, hinged on a prank the unseen visitor wanted to play on an elderly woman whose name Scott was never told. This part started to erode his belief that a divine presence was behind the messages, he said. And when he would show any reluctance to comply with the requests, the messages would stop for days.
It gets so damn lonely in that house sometimes, Scott said. I finally said yes just to keep contact.
Couldn't you have come here and talked to Maxie and Paul? Melissa asked. A 10-year-old girl truly values a good playdate.
I don't always know where other people like me are located, Scott told her. And it's hard for me to find my way around.
Melissa nodded. So, you agreed to play this prank, I said, to get Scott back on top.